fellow citizens of the world.
Calling all baby boomers. Let's take a trip down memory lane and celebrate the top 30 best things from back in the day that only you remember. From iconic toys to unforgettable TV shows, get ready to relive the golden era of your youth. Number 30. Driving into the movies. There was a time when the only way to watch a movie was to go to a theater. But then came the drive-in movie. Drive-in movies were all the rage in the 1950s and 1960s, and were especially popular with young couples. Sadly, these cinemas are rarely found today. These outdoor movie theaters allowed couples and families to watch films from the comfort of their cars. They would purchase tickets in advance and drive their vehicles into an open lot to watch a movie projected on a large outdoor screen. They could also order snacks from the snack bars at the theater or bring their food to enjoy during the movie. Number 29. Marveling at electronic calculators. Technology has come quite far. Back in the day of the baby boomers, electronic calculators were the hot tool that promised to make long division a thing of the past. While the original tool was somewhat clunkier than today's modern and sleek devices, they still got the job done. The electronic calculator was introduced in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Baby boomers who had relied on bulky slide rule calculators for math calculations were amazed at how these new devices could easily calculate complex equations. It was a revolutionary technological development that paved the way for other advancements in computing. Number 28. The signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Even if boomers were too young to remember President Lyndon B. Johnson signing the act, which outlaws discrimination based on color, race, religion, sex, or national origin, they've probably experienced the effects of the change in policy it brought about, like the integration of schools. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 contained provisions barring discrimination and segregation in education, public facilities, jobs, and housing. It created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to ensure fair hiring practices, and established a federal community relations service to assist local communities with civil rights issues. The bill also authorized the U.S. Office of Education to distribute financial aid to communities struggling to desegregate public schools. Since then, the Civil Rights Act has become as fundamental to our national identity as any of our founding documents, deeply rooted in the fabric of a nation that strives to be more perfect and to move ever forward. Number 27. Watching black athletes protest the national anthem at the Olympics. The most memorable image from the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City is the one of Tommy Smith and John Carlos, first and third place winners in the 200-meter race, giving the Black Power salute from the podium. "If I win, I am an American, not a black American," Smith said. "But if I did something bad, then they would say a Negro. We are black and we are proud of being black." Two black American athletes have made history at the Mexico Olympics by staging a silent protest against racial discrimination. Tommy Smith and John Carlos, gold and bronze medalists in the 200 meters, stood with their heads bowed and a black glove hand raised as the American national anthem played during the victory ceremony. Number 26. Buying your first record. It doesn't matter if you love the Beach Boys or the Beatles. If you were born in the 1950s, you remember purchasing your very first vinyl record and then listening to it again and again. While newer generations have made vinyl records popular again, baby boomers were doing this long before it was considered cool and trendy. Baby boomers had the greatest era of music throughout their lifetime and saw most genres peak throughout their youth and had way too many talents at their peak. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, independent record stores began to pop up all over the world, catering to the growing demand for rock, pop, country, and other genres of music. These stores often had a strong sense of community and served as a gathering place for music fans. It wasn't unusual for artists to stop in and play mini concerts or sign albums before an appearance in a particular city. Number 25. Riding in the family's wood-paneled station wagon. Though wood-paneled cars were invented back in the 1930s, they became especially popular in the 1960s and 70s as reliable but stylish family cars. The beloved Woody station wagon was the classic family car before SUVs came along. If your dad came home with one of these beauties, he couldn't wait to run off and show it to the neighbors. Families were bigger back then, hence the term baby boom, and it was a popular vehicle at the time that you don't see much of anymore. For kids, the best part of the station wagon was sitting not just in the back, but in the way, way back, the fold-down seat in the absolute rear of the vehicle that sometimes even faced backwards. Number 24. Watching the first moon landing. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong took one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Hundreds of millions of people, including many young boomers, watched in awe. In 1969, humans achieved an incredible feat by landing on the moon. Millions of people watched the event's live broadcast worldwide, including baby boomers who had grown up in a time of huge technological progress and were in awe at this momentous achievement. It was a moment that changed history and will never be forgotten by those who experienced it. The 1969 moon landing was a watershed moment in U.S. history. Number 23. The original Mickey Mouse Club. MIC, see you real soon. The Mickey Mouse Club originally ran from 1955 to 1959, and many boomers dreamed of someday becoming one of the TV show's Mouseketeers, building out a song while wearing mouse ear hats and shirts bearing their first names. The Mickey Mouse Club featured young performers known as Mouseketeers, who sang and danced to popular songs in each episode. The show was an instant success with baby boomers, who could relate to the characters' positive messages and innocent fun. Only a few of the original Mouseketeers, namely Annette Funicello, went on to Hollywood fame, but all of them are fondly remembered by boomers who watched them perform on the show, which was later resurrected for younger generations. KEY, why? Because we like you. Number 22. Watching the very first SNL episode. On October 11, 1975, a new show premiered on NBC, and it's been aiming to make America laugh ever since. The iconic sketch comedy show was originally just called Saturday Night, changed to Saturday Night Live or just SNL in 1977. From the Coneheads to Wayne Worlds to Weekend Update, the show's memorable skits have made the show a hit for decades now. But that first season was aimed smack at the boom, with boomers John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, and Jane Curtin among the cast. In 1982, 7-year-old Drew Barrymore hosted the show, becoming the youngest person ever to do so. The opening sketch of each show ends with one actor saying, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night." Number 21. Rotary dial phones. Ring! How long has it been since you have made a call with a rotary dial phone? Solid as boulders and reliable as the sun, these clunky machines once brought families together, enabled business transactions, and made long-distance love possible. They were eventually replaced with push-button dialing, and now, of course, with smartphones. Rotary phones were a popular form of communication. They featured spinning circular dials that users had to rotate for the phone to work. This phone was much slower than the punching buttons used by modern-day phones. Baby boomers will never forget the nostalgic sound of their rotary phone ringing. Number 20. Home video recording. Looking back to the 1970s, the idea of both capturing and watching home videos was starting to mature. While home movies had existed for a while thanks to Super 8, it wasn't until the invention and proliferation of the VCR that home movies became a staple of everyday life. This revolution also saw a boom in video stores and rental companies as watching Hollywood films in the comfort of your own home became increasingly commonplace. VCRs allowed average people the ability to collect their own movie library, and camcorders meant most people had small libraries of home videos filled with memories. Not only could you capture your videos, but recording your favorite shows was very rare well before the rise of the DVR. However, home video cameras were very expensive back in the 1970s and 1980s, which put them out of reach of many families. For those who grew up in the 80s and 90s, VCRs were a staple in our homes. Some of us even remember waiting while the VCR slowly rewound the tapes before we could return them to Blockbuster. There was a fine for returning without rewinding. Those were the days. Number 19. Free-range kids. Remember the freedom of being a free-range kid? No cell phones, just self-entertaining outside. In the age of constant connectivity, the idea of being a free-range kid seems like a whimsical tale. The comment fondly recalls a time when children roamed freely and safely without digital leashes, relying on imagination rather than screens. It's a charming reflection on the lost sense of security and the joy of unplanned adventures. Kids do great with totally unstructured outdoor play. They don't need an organized game or activity. If you take a bunch of kids to a park and keep an eye on them, they'll figure out stuff to do together and often come up with creative and interesting things that adults wouldn't have thought of. Just keep them physically safe and let them run around and do kid stuff. You don't need to curate everything. Number 18. Affordable housing. The Housing Act of 1954 amended that of 1949 to provide funding, not just for new construction and demolition, but also for the rehabilitation and conservation of deteriorating areas. Executive Order 11063, Equal Opportunity in Housing, issued in 1962, represented the first major federal effort to apply civil rights to housing. The 1960s saw both a high point for affordable housing in the U.S. and the building of housing projects in the inner cities for low-income and affordable housing. Now that same house's rent is 10 times higher and wages haven't kept up. The soaring cost of housing has turned the dream of affordable living into a luxury. There was a time when a single income could comfortably support a family in a spacious home. It's a poignant observation on the shifting landscape of housing affordability, leaving many nostalgic for the days when a home wasn't an unattainable luxury. Number 17. Road trips and travel in general. Boomers were the first to over-romanticize road travel. From the family trips of our youth, nothing makes us more nostalgic than the memory of Dad studying a Rand McNally atlas, to road trip poets like Jack Kerouac. We were the first generation to prove that it really was the journey, not the destination. The automobile industry boomed in the post-war decades, and the Great American Road Trip had its heyday. Many Americans would likely spend at least some of their holiday time on the road, winding up in beachside resorts where they'd while away a week or so. Others decided to enjoy America's backyard with their cars, trailers, and motorhomes. This was also the decade that skiing began to open up to the mass market, and ski resorts popped up across the states. In 1955, tourism in the States would change forever as Walt Disney opened the first Disney park in Anaheim, California. A trip to Disneyland was the dream holiday for many families across the country and beyond. Number 16. Rock and roll. The advent of rock and roll music in the 1950s brought enormous changes to American popular music, changes whose impact is still being felt. Styles that had remained on the margins of pop music began to infiltrate and eventually dominate the center. The emergence of rock and roll was an event of great cultural significance. The new audience was dominated by the so-called baby boom generation born immediately following World War II. It was a much younger target group than ever before, a large audience that shared specific characteristics of group cultural identity. These were the kids growing up in the 1950s, a period of relative economic stability and prosperity marked by a return to socially and politically conservative ways. This was also the first generation to grow up with television. This new mass medium proved a force of incalculable influence. The purchase of rock and roll records by kids in the 1950s proved a way of asserting their generational identity through rebellion against adult standards and restrictions. Thus, the experience of growing up with rock and roll music became a defining characteristic of the baby boom generation. Number 15. We took volunteering to new heights. Boomers are often criticized for being the me generation, but we aren't nearly as selfish as our reputations would suggest. When President John F. Kennedy established the Peace Corps in 1991, creating opportunities for everyday U.S. citizens to go overseas and help break the bonds of mass misery, thousands of letters poured into Washington from young Americans hoping to volunteer, according to the History Channel. It's a commitment to help others that continues to this day. Americans of all ages expressed their desire to perform some sort of service to their communities and nation, but those who came of age in the 1960s led the charge, notes the Harvard Business Review. Number 14. Gender equality. Boomers hardly invented feminism, but we definitely spearheaded it into popular culture with the women's liberation movement that began in the late 1960s. Female boomers were the first group to have mostly earned their own money for most of their lives. That's never happened before, Jane Caro, author of the book Accidental Feminists, told the Daily Edition. Prior to that, poorer women had to work for a living, but they were pitied for having to do that. For my generation, it became an aspiration. The women's movement of the 1960s and 1970s emerged during an era of massive social upheavals nationally and internationally. In the U.S., the determined struggle of African Americans in the civil rights movement had a transformative effect on the consciousness of millions of workers and youth. The movement against the war in Vietnam was enormous in scale, drawing an estimated 36 million to protests during 1969 alone. The establishment was being challenged from all sides, and women, people of color, LGBTQ people, and workers were emboldened to take their fight against oppression and inequality to higher levels of organization and action. Number 13. The Cold War ended. Though political leaders like Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev tend to get all the credit for ending the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, in reality, it was the boomer generation who pushed the hardest for thawing relations between these two global superpowers. As boomer humorist P.J. O'Rourke simply stated in an article for AARP magazine, "We brought down the Berlin Wall." When people our age on the wrong side of the Berlin Wall saw how much fun people our age on the right side of the Berlin Wall were having, it was all over with the communist bloc. Today, the Soviet Union is just a collection of countries with too many K's and Z's in their names. And China is the kind of dictatorship whose idea of world conquest is domination of the global smartphone manufacturing sector. We're the generation that laughed off totalitarianism. Number 12. Fax machine. For those of us who are old enough, we remember having to use a fax machine to send documents. This was before email and scanners were less common. Fax machines required a dedicated telephone line and were the only way to transfer documents over distances for decades. Dealing with failed transfers, paper jams, and fading ink are memories that fax machines have left behind for many of us. The fax machine's struggle for relevance is almost like a daily soap opera. You know it's still around, but you're not quite sure why. With emails, scanned documents, and digital signatures, fax machines are becoming the retro choice for communication. Using a fax machine today is like insisting on sending a handwritten letter via carrier pigeon when there's email. It's a relic of a bygone era, and it seems like it might be time to pull the plug on faxing. Number 11. Store catalogs. One of the most pervasive memories we boomers have locked away is a big catalog or two sitting on the coffee table right next to the ashtray. They would come in the mail annually from companies like Montgomery Ward, Sears, JCPenney, and Spiegel. All it would take to receive them was to buy something at the store. If they got your name and address, the monstrous consumers of wood pulp would begin showing up automatically, generally laid on your welcome mat by those poor abused postmen of the 1960s. Back in the days before the internet, when discount stores carried stuff that was, well, discount, meaning junk, consumers knew that they needed to deal with department stores for the good, high-quality stuff that would last years. Thus, the previous mentioned retail establishments would invest money in the big catalogs that would end up in our living rooms. It was good business. Number 10. Dressing up for your flight. In the old days, flying was a special occasion. People would dress up in their best clothing to fly. This is likely because flying was reserved for the wealthy. Airlines used to rely on prestige marketing and provided a high level of service. Food and drinks during the flight used to rival the best restaurants. These days, taking a flight is no big deal, and most people prefer to dress in their comfiest clothing to endure sitting for many hours. Also, the less said about airline food and drinks on board these days, the better. Number 9. Quality furniture and appliances. Gone are the times when furniture shopping didn't involve deciphering cryptic assembly instructions. The comments reflect on an era when the quality furniture meant sturdy pieces made from real wood, not particle board. It's a playful nod to the charm of furniture that stood the test of time. Unlike the questionable endurance of today's build-it-yourself alternatives, the longevity of household appliances is a topic of lament. It contrasts the enduring quality of appliances from yesteryears with the more fleeting lifespan of modern counterparts. A touch of humor underscores the frustration of appliances that don't seem to last as long as their vintage counterparts, turning once basic items into modern luxuries. Appliances were once made to last 20 to 30 years. Now you're lucky to get 5 to 10. Prices have gone considerably higher as well. Number 8. Work boundaries. In the not-so-distant past, the concept of leaving work at the office was a reality. Boomers expect standard business hours of 9 to 5. They are committed to working hard and knocking tasks out in one go. Clocking out meant leaving work behind you until you clocked back in. Memos took time, not hundreds of emails back and forth. This highlights the luxury of clear work boundaries, where once you clocked out, the job stayed behind. No constant barrage of emails demanding attention after hours. It's a reminder of a time when switching off meant more than just turning off your computer screen. Number 7. Clothing designed for durability. Fast fashion may dominate the scene now, but this comment draws attention to a time when clothing was crafted for longevity. The notion of garments designed to withstand trends and wear, rather than ending up as disposable items, takes us back to when fashion was less about quantity and more about enduring style. Craftsmanship, attention to detail, and the durability of products are highly prized by baby boomers. The shopping habits of baby boomers demonstrate their interest in valuable products from knowledgeable, respected brands they can trust. Number 6. Punctuality. Remember when saying you'll be somewhere at a certain time actually meant being there, not stuck in traffic or lost in digital distractions? In the golden days of punctuality, plans were made and adhered to with a reliability that's become a rarity. This comment reflects on the luxury of a time when meeting someone at a specific time meant exactly that. No excuses, no delays. It's a gentle jab at the modern chaos that can hijack our schedules, leaving nostalgia for the days when time management was a simpler affair. Being punctual is a reflection of a way people do business. It says a lot about an individual and an organization. It's a sign of respect to the person or function you're attending. Being punctual is a sign of efficiency and respect. Baby boomers grew up with the great Vince Lombardi, who said, "If you are 5 minutes early, you are already 10 minutes late." Number 5. Affordable college education. The dream of obtaining a college education without accumulating a mountain of debt seems like a distant memory. This reflects on a time when pursuing higher education was more financially manageable, offering a stark contrast to the student loan burden faced by many today. It's a wistful glance at the days when education wasn't a financial albatross. When those boomers entered college at the age of 18 in 1982, the average annual tuition at a public school in current dollars was $1,031, and the average cost of a private college was $4,639. When the oldest boomers were in college in 1964, the average annual cost of a public school was just $243, and the average annual cost of a private school was $1,088. A college education you could pay for without drowning in debt. Number 4. Postcards. Do you remember waiting by the mailbox, eagerly anticipating a reply from a faraway relative or friend? Back in the day, before email and texting, people communicated by sending paper letters and postcards through the mail. While baby boomers will fondly remember sending and receiving these physical tokens of affection, Gen Zers have likely never used one. The nostalgia that postcards evoke is simply beautiful and captivating. They provide an extraordinary way to immortalize the memories of school life and keep families in touch no matter how far away they are from each other. Nowadays, with digitalization being at its peak and conversations happening so quickly, it's nice to know sending a postcard remains one of the most treasured methods for communicating with our loved ones. Something exceptional. Number 3. Beatlemania. The Beatles were one of the biggest musical sensations of the 1960s and a major part of baby boomer culture. Their infectious songs captivated audiences worldwide, and their fan base included millions of adoring fans known as Beatlemaniacs. The band's music has stood the test of time and still resonates with people today. Beatlemania was given the name to describe the ecstatic, female-led fan culture surrounding the Beatles between 1963 and 1966. The first term circulated throughout British media in late 1963 and was used in order to capture the teenage excitement that followed the Liverpool band as they toured the UK. This mania, whether witnessed in Newcastle or Portsmouth, was attributed to screaming girls who assembled anywhere the Beatles performed or appeared. Young women reacted passionately to the Beatles' energetic, mercy beat style of rock and roll and found the band's softer, masculine style irresistible. Their early Beatle image of mop-top hairstyles, matching bespoke suits, and chunky Cuban heel boots further exemplified the band's perceived sensibilities. The global fervor of Beatlemania was unprecedented and set a tone for all subsequent music-based fan cultures. Number 2. Listening to radio broadcast. Before television, baby boomers had to rely on radio broadcasts for entertainment. Radio provided a range of programs, from comedies to dramas and sports updates, that families would gather around to hear. Think about radio, and what often comes to mind is the crystal clear music and spoken words broadcast by FM stations across America. But radio wasn't always so advanced or so popular. Like many technologies, it evolved gradually and gained acceptance slowly. Today, radio continues to evolve as it competes with other technologies to attract and hold an audience. Number 1. Sunday newspaper comic book characters. For a child growing up before the internet and Sunday morning cartoons, comics were everything. One of the most important moments for baby boomers growing up were the Sunday newspaper comic strips. Even as new technology arrived introducing new toys, there was just something special about the Sunday morning comics. Whether you called them the Sunday Funnies, or the Funnies, or the Funny Papers, comics delighted kids and adults around the country. What's great is that even though most of the Sunday paper would be in black and white, there were always some comics in color. There were plenty of favorite comics to enjoy between Peanuts, Dennis the Menace, and Marmaduke. Arguably one of the most beloved comic strips of all time, Peanuts was a staple read in the Sunday Funnies. Started by Charles M. Schulz in 1950, Peanuts comics ran original strips for over 50 years, as its beloved characters are part of comic strip lore forever. What's your fondest memory from back in the day? Share it with us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more nostalgic content. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the past, and until next time, keep those memories alive.